question of how did the changes that happened in Bubs' musical style along the way, changes in arrangement style and performance style, how did those dramatically affect the entire landscape of collegiate and contemporary a cappella music? And also, why did that happen in the Bubs and not in some other group? And then as a PS, I think we're going to try to answer the question, whatever happened to intros?
Special participation by Scott.
So the way we're going to do this is, I'll make some, I'll have some very brief remarks in just a minute, and then I'm going to start with Bill Duvel at the far end. Ask Bill to talk for a few minutes, and then work our way down the line all the way up to Michael Grant, and hopefully that'll get us about halfway through our allotted time, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A with you all. And if you don't have questions, I'll have. Oh, Peter, did you want to say something?
All I want to say is, let's go to 10:45, so we have an hour and a half. And after we're finished, if you want, the kids are going to be putting on a performance in Cohen Auditorium at about 10:45.
Sounds great.
And after this, there is coffee and donuts, if you haven't had them already, in Alumni Lounge.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, let me just briefly tell you who our panelists are. So Bill Duvel was an original Beelzebub and was music director in 1964 of the Brothers in Song album. And then you were not music director your senior year, were you?
I'd say it was.
You were music director in 64, 65 as well, so for that second album too, Beelzebub Sing Up. Gene Blake was music director in 71, 72, and 72, 73, which included the White Album. And Gene was really the first arranger to do original arrangements custom tailored for the group. Andy Craning is the only 4-year music director in the history of the Bubs. Andy stepped into the role in a pinch halfway through his freshman year and then never let go of the reins. After that, so Andy graduated in 1979. Andy followed in Gene's footsteps and became the second, most prolific arranger at the time in Bubs history. Marty Fernandi was music director for 2 years, 1983, 84, and 84, 85. Those were his last 2 of 4 years in the group. Marty also did scores of arrangements for the group, has continued to arrange after he graduated, and as you all know, one of the best soloists in the history of the Bubs. Deke Sharon was music director, was in the group for 4 years, was music director in 1988, 89 when we recorded our first CD, that was 14, and then he was historian the following year, and then his final year in the group was music director again when we recorded Foster Street. Deke and Ed Boyer, who's sitting next to Deke, I think at this point have done more arrangements than anyone else in the history of the group. Deke's nickname in the wider world is the godfather of a cappella, or the father of contemporary a cappella. Deke's just recently published a book on a cappella arranging. Ed Boyer graduated in 2004, and like Deke, like myself, was in the Tufts NEC 5-year program. So Ed was a 5-year Bub and was music director for 2 of those years. 3 of those years. I didn't do my homework. I'm sorry, Ed. Ed has done also scores of arrangements, and as you've heard, well, you were probably here for his other panels, and you probably know Ed's resume, but you know about Ed's work with Deke on Sing Off, and his work on Glee. Ed has produced every Bubs album since he was in the group. And Michael Grant is perhaps the next to rise up in this lineage of incredible music directors that the Bubs have had over the years. Michael is music director currently, and elected to be music director again next year. Michael's a junior, and so he'll have been music director for 2 years. So that's the panel, and I feel like if I do nothing else this morning, just getting all these guys up next to each other on stage, my job is done. But let's start things off. I'm going to start down there, and we're going to work our way chronologically. I'm going to prompt each guy with a question or two. We'll work our way down the line just to get the juices flowing. we'll open it up to something, more Q&A. Jump in whenever you like. So I want to start with a question for Bill, which is this. You decide that you're going to be part of this effort to start a men's a cappella group at Tufts. Then what happens next? How do you decide what songs you're going to sing? Where do the arrangements come from? What are those arrangements like? Can you kind of situate for us, what is the musical landscape there when you decide you're going to get started?
And we didn't have anything to work with, including voices. We got started when we first got going, except for Tim possibly, none of us realized that this could really build into what it is today. And I have to say, I'm extraordinarily humbled by sitting at the same table with these very accomplished arrangers and professional musicians. It's really quite something amazing for me, so thanks you guys for inviting me on this program. Well, we got started this way. Basically, a bunch of guys got together that enjoyed singing. We all had done singing previously, some barbershop quartets, some in choral singing. A couple of guys had actually been in a professional group called the Nomads, and it's a whole separate story you can talk to Tim or Pete Arnold about, or John Todd. And we got together, and the guys brought to the table songs that they had sung before and wanted us to sing. There were really two schools of thought, although there was no formal designation of those schools at the time. One was the barbershop repertoire, which almost everyone had sung from, and there were a few guys who were real advocates of that genre of music. And the other school, if you will, was the choral school. I put myself in that category. Who enjoyed choral arrangements, things, I don't know if their names you know, but like Fred Waring has a whole bunch of things. And some of us were great fans of close harmony groups like the High-Lows and the Four Freshmen, names you may recall. And so for some of us, there was an ambition to do that more difficult, more complicated music. At the time, the arrangements and the songs that we had available to us were just commercially available. There were very, very few a cappella arrangements, especially for TTBB. There was some SATB, and we adapted a few of those, but it was quite difficult to find good men's choral music. And the way we went about getting that music was quite varied. We didn't have the internet, of course, but we would go down to, there were music stores in Boston, Boston Music Company, and another one down at Boylston and Sherman, yes. And we expected to have all kinds of great stuff. Okay, well, our way of searching through the music was, okay, well, here's our files if you'd like to find something, go right ahead. And it was like, oh my Lord. So we spent hours and hours down there trying to find good arrangements. We also looked to the Whiffenpoofs because of the young connection through Tim Dale and his dad who had sung in the Whiffenpoofs, I think. Remember that correctly?
That's correct.
We took a trip down there. It was a great trip, and Tim's dad got us into the Whiffenpoofs files. I had no idea whether or not that was with or without permission. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure that was without.
And that gave us a couple of leads anyway. And of course, at the time, you may not be aware of this, but there was a thing called the Yale Songbook. And a guy named Fennel Keith, who was like the Whiffenpoofs Keith Sharon at the time. He did, a bazillion arrangements. Many of those were published, and so we got a number of our tunes out of them. So we really had to scrabble around for arrangements. And how do we decide what music we were going to do? It was principally a joint decision. Somebody would bring something to the table, we'd look at it, we'd kind of try it a few times. If it looked like something that would be good, had some audience appeal, we'd stay with it. A lot of music was too difficult for us, especially in the first years. But one of the things we wanted to aspire to is to do more interesting music than just barbershop. And that led barbershop and standard choral arrangements. And that led us, especially in 64 and later on 65, to try more lyric, I'll say, arrangements. Things like Cherry Orchard, which I think many of you know. The latter part of that is the kind of music that hit a sweet spot for me anyway. I We had a couple of original arrangements from Al Trinan. I tried my hand at it, but I don't play the piano, so it's an excruciatingly difficult way of getting arrangements. The other way we did it was another painstaking process, which you can still do today, and that is to listen to a recording and try to transcribe it by ear. And remember, in those days, our way of transcribing was to have a turntable going around and take the needle and put it down there and place a few bars and take off and try to punk out on the piano a little as I heard. Okay, just do that over and over and over again, little by little, build the piece, and the pieces that you can't quite figure out, make those up and put those down. So is that your arrangement or is that the original arrangement? In my view, that's the original arrangement. So we, one piece that, two pieces that I did, one was this arrangement of Summertime and another arrangement of Moon River. Those, I can't remember exactly where Summertime came from, but the Moon River is really stolen from the Four Freshmen in their arrangement. It's really, sort of epitomizes that lyric and close harmony kind of music that I personally like. And that's one of the advantages of the music directors, I'm sure you will all agree, is that you have considerable say over, well, what pieces are we going to do or what aren't we going to do? So you'll see a lot of the influence, I'm sure, of the music that you've actually heard from the groups through the years is due in large measure to the music director and their ability to find and bring to the group good music. Sort of setting the stage for the future, we knew shortly after performing for a year or two that in order to really sort of create a brand for ourselves, to claim something as our own, we really needed our own original arrangements. And at the time, we didn't really have the talent other than Al Trinan to do unique arrangements of our own. So it was with great joy and great excitement to find out that younger guys who come into a group like Gene Blake, who were incredibly talented, brought this really interesting music and really entertaining music, and it was just great for us. And I'd love to come to homecoming concerts and hear all this new stuff that Gene was coming up with, like Bandstand. You do choo-choo to go here, is that the next guy down there?
Bill, let me cut you off right there. We'll be
like 5 minutes up.
No, you've got us off to a great start. I just have one quick follow-up question, because we're not going to be playing audio and I'm not putting pictures of the arrangements up here on stage. Fair to say those early arrangements in general, 4 parts and kind of homophonic structure, not often very often just 4 parts singing backgrounds, not a solo coming forward.
Yeah, that's one thing you probably noticed last evening, the distinct change in the format of how the arrangements are done. Almost all of the arrangements we've done are full 4-part arrangements. There may be some solo parts, and a few of the tunes, like we did Ride the Chariot yesterday, had a solo out front of a choral group. But by and large, the music was all people singing pretty much all the time as part of a harmonic progression of variations on the melody, where everyone is singing, not just do whoop 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 or something like that, real music.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Bill. So, Bill, thank you. I want to turn to Gene now. So, Gene, you joined the group in the fall of 1970, and as Bill mentioned, Al Trinan had done a couple of original arrangements, and a few other guys come to mind. I think Phil Luber and John Prescott had done a few in the late 60s. I think Steve Beatty's mom did a couple. But you made it your business to start cranking out original arrangements tailored specifically to the singers in the group. That strikes me as huge change. And I want to know, how did that come about? And is that what led to, more or less at the same time, the group starting to do pop songs? Because it seems to me maybe if you're stuck with published arrangements, you're stuck with whatever the published arrangements are of, and they're probably not current pop songs, at least back then. But is that how this happened, that the group started doing current pop songs, because you started doing original arrangements?
Yeah, when I first got in, it was very much the way Bill described it. It was you could spend hours down at Boston Music Company looking for things. But I would bring some of those things back, like, we had some performers in the group you might have seen last night who were very good with show tunes. And so I would take a couple of tunes from Camelot, and if you'd see an E-flat major chord, you just throw a D in it. Now it's E-flat major 7th, and that sounded really good in the 70s. Maybe use a minor 7th, and so I would modify them and then boldly put my name on the arrangement. That was sort of the beginning.
You see right away, you know the difference here. He's talking musicology. None of our people knew any of that stuff. A major chord with a D in it, or what is that? What's it sound like?
But, for me, a lot of it started in high school. My music teacher had played with trumpet with Les Brown, and I recall a concert that he invited me to. I played tenor sax in high school, and I showed up at the concert. There were 600 people in the audience, and the band consisted of the teacher and me. And he said, we're going to end a drummer, and he said, we're going to play these songs. And he had the songs, they were all well known to me, and there were no notes on the page, just some chords. And that night, that was sort of you get on board or you're gone. And that really taught me that in music, there is a lot of creativity that you can bring that can be entertaining to people. So the arranging thing in the 70s, in 1970 we sang 12 songs, 70, 71, and our big hit was Bushes and Briars. That was the screamer. Yeah. So we started to arrange some newer material after that. Part of it, though, the influence, Jim Barrett and Killer, they really liked the humorous tunes, so they brought up some Tom Lehrer music, which was eventually arranged to be prepared and whatever. But there was that kind of humor that we were looking for in the Bubs at the time. And then also, I think my first arrangement was actually Lizzie Borden, which brought together the interesting phrases, gave her husband 40 whacks with an axe. And that just never seemed to have the audience appeal that we were searching for in the 70s. So I kind of diverted from doing the humorous tunes after that and went more into, started out just modifying stock arrangements, which was really sort of how I learned to parse it all together. And then one day when I was actually walking back from rehearsal, the idea for Happy Together came to me, and I got back to my room and wrote it down as fast as I possibly could. Finished the whole thing in about 45 minutes. And I realized then that you could actually create this a cappella thing without being totally devoted to the song. You could actually arrange it. But when the audience was sitting there, they could, okay, they're singing Happy Together. And then Up on the Roof and a few others like that. And I found, this is really sort of the selfish thing that we were into back then. Audiences screamed louder when you did music they knew. And we really got addicted to that juice that comes from that. So our performing style started to change, and we started to pick arrangements in that way. But we didn't really, we honestly didn't really pick tunes. I mean, the music director was sort of a demigod, at least I acted that way. And, so
I think you're the only one up there.
Yeah, you're the only one.
I would just bring in stuff, and we would sing it, and there wasn't a lot of debate about it. Song that crashed and burned, and then I would just bring in more stuff. So we would, we had about a 50% hit rate. There's a lot of stuff in the files that's terrible. But it was, for us, it was 70, 71, 72. It was kind of a blend of, let's do some show tunes. We had the Naples and a few other guys, singing that kind of thing. And then we were trying to drift a little bit away from the Whiffs music and move more towards our own style.
So we were just talking with Bill about how the arrangements were kind of very traditional choral style, if I could characterize it that way. Was that beginning to change?
Yeah, the first few things were all 4-part, and actually, even now in the chapel, you see there's still 4-part stuff that comes out of me, because I do find that there's something in what I'm interested in that just brings people together so they can sing. And I don't, some aspect of me just wants people to be able to sing and remember how well they used to sing, and just to create that harmony together. So that four-part thing will always be there, I think. But we did start to branch out a little bit. We had soloists. I mean, you know, we had some really great voices, so there was a lot of that going on. Also, musical style in the country, if you listen to the groups that were out there, you'd say a band, but there was almost always a soloist in front of the band. You might not have, you know, known it that way, but there was a lot of that going on. So we had
When you went and performed with other college groups, were there other groups that were doing pop songs?
No, not really, not too much. I think the first time I heard one was, we were over at Wellesley, and I think it was the Brown Chattertox did Grateful Dead's Truckin'. That was the first, that was like 1970, 71. That was the first modern thing I heard from another group. It was a women's group. But before that, I mean, we would go to like an MIT log jam, and the Zumbis would come in from UMass Amherst. They were very good, but their big hit was
Who were the Zumbis you're talking about?
yeah, the big hit was a 50s doo-wop too. And so 50s doo-wop was still, you know, it was like the 70s. Yeah, what's your name? So I memorized that, and later we did it for Peking. Pretty much stole their version. But no, you know, going off and doing newer material, we started to just felt we were trying to connect with the audiences a little bit more.
Great. So before I move on to Andy, I have one more question for that end of the table, which I don't want to leave behind the early '70s without acknowledging the influence of a group called the Two-by-Fours on the early musical development of Bubs. I say those words, and I don't really feel like I even have any appreciation or knowledge of what that was all about. Can you just tell us real briefly?
Are you admitting you have no idea what you're talking about? Yeah, this is another sort of a bit of fortune that came our way. It turned out that, I can't remember the exact connection, but through Tim Bale and one of the other members.
John Todd.
Was it?
John Todd's girlfriend.
Was that right?
John Todd's girlfriend lived next door to Fred Rosell.
Oh, man, I don't feel all about that, but in the he's John Todd is one of our guys, and Fred Rosell is one of the guys who sang in this group called the Two-by-Fours. So it's 8 guys, that look much like I do, and he's down to Marty. And Marty and I, so those guys, they're too young. So this was an old guys group, and they sang a lot of tunes that they enjoyed, and a lot of the music they liked to do was arranged by a very talented arranger, actually a couple of guys in the group, and they did original arrangements of old 30s and 40s numbers that were very nice, introduced me to some good stuff, and they were sort of a mentor group for us. We would go over their place, and they would sing a couple tunes, and we'd sing a couple tunes, and we'd yak it up and so forth. They might be analogous, you would say, in an informal way to what the PAA is now to the Beelzebubs. Unbeknownst to us, they did some mentoring, a lot of mentoring to us. We really realized it was happening at the time, but that's who they were.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, they, you know, I mean, part of what they did was simply support. So we would go to their house and sing. We just do, you know, maybe 4 weeks before, et cetera. And when you would lay out the new material, you know, you're kind of wondering what the reaction is going to be, and it was very supportive. So we got a feeling that, okay, if these guys are out there on stage and are really part of that whole acapella scene, that group was running off to these spring sings every year, and they were getting a big-time dose of the state-of-the-art of acapella arrangements. And then they would borrow, not steal them, and bring them back, and then we would see some of that, hear some of that through them, and then we would do our thing and kind of get a sense of whether we were in the league or whether we were moving in a different direction or whatever. So it was kind of almost a chemistry experiment.
Great. Thank you. So Andy created. Oh, yeah.
I had just one other comment.
Yeah. Okay.
If that's okay if you.
Sure.
Just tell you a little bit about my own musical journey. When I was at Tufts, I was students are now. But I also like immersed in Bubs. It was like, hey, this is everything. Arranging tours, and by the way, clarification, the first Long Island concert was actually at my high school. And after that, I went on, sort of plunged into my real career. I went to graduate school, got married, children, everything. I did absolutely nothing musically for 13 years, and did not realize what was happening to me. So we eventually moved back to Boston, and after 13 years, I came back and I went down to the music room down in Cohen, all by myself, and I brought out some of the old music, and I went, oh my God, what were you thinking? So I knew about the 2x4s, and Don and a couple other guys were singing at that time now as adults in the 2x4s, and connected up with them, and they let me sing for a couple of years with them, and it was like, oh my God, what was I thinking, not doing any music for 13 years? This is the best thing ever. It will never be out of my life again.
So you still sing in a group?
Yeah, I do sing in a group now. The group you'll have a chance to hear tomorrow afternoon. I convinced them all to come with me. I asked them, oh, it's today? Yeah. It's this afternoon, as a matter of fact. Yeah, great.
So, all right, thank you, Bill. So, prior to the fall of 1975, it was not possible to be a freshman and be in the Bubs because auditions would only happen at the end of the year. But fall of 1975, the group decided to have auditions, I think because they were short baritones. And, of all things. And took two guys named Andy Cranian and Andy Lackoff. Yeah, Andy Lackoff. Disappeared pretty quickly. Good thing the group had taken freshman Andy Cranian in the fall of 1975, because about 3 months later he was music director, with like 6 guys left standing there in the group. It was kind of a turbulent moment there. So Andy, my question for you is this. When you got into the group, the Blake years were not too far back in the rearview mirror. 73, 74 had been another very strong year with Michael Miller and the Blue album. 74, 75 was pretty solid too, and then things went haywire in 75, 76. And you had to assume the reins with something like 6 guys. Without rehashing, which we loved to do separately, what was that all about? What I'm curious here is, like, how do you deal with that musically as music director? Because I find it pretty remarkable that it was just a year later, 76, 77, that you guys were back in the recording studio and put out the album Balloon Hall. And then by the time you were a senior, put out the terrific Pub album. How did you deal with that musically? I've heard you say that you leaned heavily on Gene, but can you elaborate on that and just in general give us a picture of sort of what was your approach? How did you bring things from what you had inherited and move on to the next level?
First of all, thanks for having me on. It's fun. When I said last night that what we did in the mid-70s was, 90 Blake, 10 Cranian, that really was pretty accurate.
I think you had said 8 Cranian last night.
Talk about misspeaking.
No, you left 2 for Langer and Vincent.
I did leave 2 for Eddie, and you know what? I'll get to that in a little bit. Very, very important contributions and the beginning of a trend that we will see then for the subsequent 38 years to bring us to present day, with non-music directors making very important musical contributions. You referenced the White Album year and the Blue Album year, and really the years leading up to the fall of 75 and including the fall of 75 were very strong years. My very first semester in the group, which was September 75 to December 75, was an excellent experience in really so many respects. We did have some fresh arrangements. Bob Yaffe was a very vital music director, a really strong musician, had a good handle on directing the group. We had 14 guys, so we often talk about this dark era, but we started that school year with 14 guys. I mean, there haven't been too many groups bigger than that. It did kind of go haywire halfway through the year, just through a whole set of crazy circumstances. One guy graduated, one guy's theatrical career really exploded, and he had a company opportunity with the Boston Shakespeare Company. I mean, how do you say no to that? And then end up with the career of Peter Gallagher, right? So a number of guys decided it just wasn't for them. And this is, I mean, man, this is 1975. Everybody is quitting everything. That's the order of the day, right? It's not cool to stay in, it's cool to drop out. And guys were dropping out. And so the losers who stayed behind, and by the way, I subsequently learned it wasn't 6. It wasn't quite as dire as I think we all made it out to be. It was 8. Bill Heenahan was off part of the fall and came back in December from an injury, and not only rejoined the group to kind of shore up the, a lot of the instability, but dropped down to bass because we didn't have any basses. I mean, Bill rejoined the group and became our only bass. And we otherwise really weren't going to sing, not as a 4-part group anyway. To your question, though, about the music, I'm thrust into the role, and I mean literally thrust into the role of music directorship. It wasn't something I chose. It kind of chose me when 4 of the 8 guys admitted they couldn't read music. 2 other guys said, well, I'm graduating in a semester. I don't really know what good I could be. And, finally, the short straw fell to me. Let's give this guy a swing at it. Had never arranged a piece of music in my life. I think like most bub directors, it's not something you've done in high school. Well, today it is, but back then it certainly wasn't. So we had a lot of stock arrangements. We already had a fairly burgeoning, file of music in the bub room. Of course, we had Blake. So I have to take a momentary diversion and say, Gene's influence on really all of us, but certainly on me, is just something you can't even measure, you can't even describe. Gene not only took what was current on the radio and put it out there, and I mean within months of being on the radio, but Gene has a gift that I completely lack, which is that he could start with a melody line and the chord changes in his head and do his own thing. All of these guys can do that, and that was never really my strength. So we would do things like for Emily, wherever I may find her, or Up on the Roof, or You Baby last night. And it didn't sound exactly like the groups that had done it on the radio. It was Gene's own interpretation. So I was less of an interpreter, ultimately, when I finally started arranging, and really more of a kind of transcriptional arranger.
A prolific one. A prolific one.
That's called quantity, not quality.
Well, I want to take issue with that because I mean, my perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, and anybody up here, but my perspective is that like these Manhattan transfer influenced arrangements that you did, I look at the arrangements that were happening by the time you were a senior, which you were doing and kind of the general style and nature of the arrangements at that point. And I think, and I hope Gene would acknowledge too, that it had advanced.
He became the master of the medley too.
Yeah, that's for sure. And let's take a minute here, and I had planned to do this even if he hadn't been in the audience. I wanted to make sure to mention a particularly fruitful collaboration during those years between Andy and Craig Meyer, which I think resulted in three arrangements maybe?
Yeah.
But ones that got a lot of mileage. And then, Craig, am I right, you then went to graduate school at University of Pennsylvania, and with those arrangements and perhaps others, started Penn 65000. Sadly, they weren't as interested in the music part of it. Yeah. But they still, I think Penn 65000, if they even still exist, which is not totally clear to me at this moment, but when I was in Bubs and we were singing with them, they would sing Bay Blues as their like group song. Like our arrangement of Bay Blues as their group song. While we're at it, I might as well mention too that there was another class of '79, Bob Elliott McCrory, who stocked himself up with Crane arrangements and Crane and Meyer arrangements and went to graduate school at Duke and started the Duke Pitchforks, which are, were still very much in existence. An excellent group. So Andy, anything you want to tell us about your arranging style or how you feel like you maybe, took what you had inherited and kind of moved it on to another level?
Yeah, sure. I would say the best lesson I got was from Gene, to take what people really wanted to hear. And fortunately, there's no shortage of material, and you don't have to prostitute yourself. It's not like you need to sing something you don't want to sing anyway. It was stuff that we were familiar with, current music by the group America, for instance, like Daisy Jane and Tin Man, thank you. So that really started, I guess, the second half of my freshman year, but really got more into swing the beginning of my sophomore year, when I started to think about the personnel, just to kind of tie up the loose end about that dark period of the spring of '76. We did make it through that year with 8 guys. We canceled our entire book of concerts of 4 and reduced it to 1, which was the pub. And we've got a photo that circulated not long ago on Twitter of that performance, and that was how I was reminded that we in fact had 8 guys.
When you took that photo in 1976, did you know that it was going to circulate on Twitter?
What's Twitter? So, we make it through with 8 guys, and then we add only 2, but that really gave us the opportunity, I think, to fill out our voices. So we had at least 4 parts that were very well represented. We brought in 2 excellent basses in Gary Clay and Mike McGovern. We had strong representation in each of the other voice parts. Barry Wentworth returns from Germany, so we've got a full group. And we can start to think about new material. We don't have to rely on 100% Blake. We can scale it back to 75%. And Crane can contribute a couple of things like Tin Man, for instance. So I'm listening to the radio, and what do kids want to hear, the college campuses. And I'm starting to do some stuff like that. I hear this fabulous band, Quacky Duck and his Barnyard Friends, that nobody has heard of, a New Jersey-based band. And they produced 1 album, one song of which is the Barnyard Song, which kind of crashed and burned a little bit last night, but still fun to attempt.
And it's still, as you pointed out last night, the first instance of vocal percussion in the Bubs.
Yeah, such as it was.
So, just very, very quickly, is it your sense that at that point, other groups out there were also listening, their music directors were also listening to the radio?
I think it's starting to happen.
Started to disseminate?
I don't remember a lot of the college gigs, to be honest, but truthfully, it's because we really had very few in the first couple of years. We're just starting to build up the kind of the inventory of gigs again. Matt Young High School, that was always a classic, so you could see what the little Catholic schoolgirls were interested in, musically speaking.
All right, Andy, I'm going to move it along. Thank you, Andy. So, Marty, let's start with your arranging style. I joined the Bubs just a few years after you graduated, and for Deke and me, your arrangements were the gold standard. Allison, Major Tom, Chattanooga Choo Choo, these were huge hits for us that we were performing at the time. For me, a classic for an Andy arrangement is imaginative and original. It's also intricate, beautifully crafted with a lot going on, yet it's still clearly choral music. It's music that really is suited for voices and comes out of a choral tradition. Almost what I think of as almost the pinnacle of choral style Bubs arranging before our arrangements took this big turn into more instrumental style. How did you think about arrangements, and what was in your mind when you were in that position of having to choose songs to do and decide how to put them together, and what you were going to carry forward, what you wanted to do differently? or speak to anything else that you're doing.
Skipped to like when I'm like doing it and I'm in my rhythm.
Oh, okay. All right. I mean, that didn't happen the minute you arrived.
But I can address that.
Well, you can back up and start somewhere else.
Well, I want to amend something that Andy keeps saying. Maybe it's true, since he keeps saying it. I'm sorry. I was singing last night after the concert and I have no voice left. Maybe it's true that when Andy was actually at Tufts, they were doing much more late arrangements than Crane arrangements. By the time I was at it was Crane, and then something. No, because he was still contributing. This is something that we haven't brought up yet, is when music directors graduate, but then still keep arranging for the group. And I did that. I did that for years. And Andy certainly did that for years. I mean, that's maybe something that
And Gina.
got from Andy, was that, you don't just graduate and stop. You keep contributing. But we were in my freshman year, we were just ransacking Bubs styles. Like the first half of the history concert was our freshman, everything up to the beginning of the 80s was what we were singing. We sang Barnyard Song, we probably even sang Band. I mean, we did barbershop, we even did madrigals, just like, printed choral arrangements we were still doing my freshman year. A lot of doo-wop still, we did at the Hop. And this is what the landscape was in 1981, 1982.
Yeah, thank you.
Like other college groups, because we went around and we heard there, so it was doo-wop and it was barbershop still. With some popular music thrown in, but it was always sort of like a treat, Although I do remember going to Wesleyan once, the fall of my freshman year, and the group there sing a song by the progressive rock group Gentle Giant, a group called a song called On Reflection that I love, but they made a terrible mess of it because it's impossible to sing. I appreciated that they had tried, because I love that.
Let's make sure we talk about song selection.
Yeah.
Right, well, and then, thank you. I knew that second. Because I wasn't a normal kid. I wasn't a normal high school student. I listened to QXR, which is the classical radio station in New York. I wasn't really up on pop music by the time I show up at Tufts. So I'm arranging what I like. And the first thing I arrange for the Bubs is Saber Dance by the Andrews Sisters. So it's my heart begins to tingle when the bell begins to jingle, zing. Every time they play Saber Dance, that's what I'm doing.
We need that Spanish flea for the next one.
Handing that over to Dave Pratt, and promptly, toss it.
I still have it.
That was never done, so that's
Still have it.
available. You can debut that arrangement.
Yeah.
Immediately after that, I arranged Monday, which was a big hit for us, and we sang it all throughout that first year with our soloist Matt Farkas, who just sang it that 1 year and disappeared, sort of. But Monday was an example of the kind of stuff that we were doing. We weren't arranging what was, just played on the radio that day. We were arranging stuff that we grew up with. So it was like 60s and 70s for us in the early 80s was what we started arranging. My third arrangement, again, throwback, I took a 1936 recording of Sing 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 by Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians, and I arranged that. Dave also tossed that. 2 out of 3.
I'm sorry.
And then I went on my fourth arrangement my freshman year, because I grew up watching and being infatuated with MGM musicals, so I took the song from MGM's 1953, The Bandwagon, Louisiana Hayride, sung by Nanette Febray in the movie, and arranged it for
myself as the six showcase. It's really quite a grand arrangement, actually.
I didn't realize how much show music you did.
It really sounded good. We did well by it. But then, the summer of 1982 came, and I was an arranging machine. I was living in the ATO. I was spending all my time in the basement. I joke on the beat all the time. They chained me to the piano and just like gave me songs. I had no filter. I would arrange anything they told me to arrange. Dave told me to arrange. If somebody was there, I arranged that.
Games.
What's that?
Games.
Games people play was like the Klein's
Recording contract.
Recording contract was your idea. I might have had my own ideas here and there. I did Ticket to Ride during spring rehearsal.
One fine day, I think, too, that summer. Maybe. Yeah.
I don't think so. That's later. I did Supremes medley in the fall. I did Memory in the fall. Now, Memory is a good example of something that had just come out. Cast had just opened on Broadway. I had the London Cast album, and I arranged that. So it was what I was listening to, and I wasn't listening to what the rest of the college kids were listening to, so it was just sort of a weird repertoire. But by my sophomore year, I started to, I started, now,
You can see that in your.
there was the audience, and
Oh, then.
no, they were very, the most important thing about the audience was that they wanted new stuff, it seemed to me. So we were just arranging to, as fast as we could, so that every concert, at least every home concert, it was almost completely new songs. Just new stuff, new stuff, new stuff. Practicing. So by sophomore year, or no, actually by my junior year when I'm music director now, we're doing Uptown Girl, which had just come out that summer. We're doing, by the spring, we're doing Thriller, which had just come out. And at the same time, I was going back and forth to do Japanese Choo Choo. So it was a mix.
So speaking of Thriller, I'm going to go out and say that I don't think that Bubs have ever done choreo as well as you guys did in 83, 84 on Thriller. I mean, I know my groups did. Were you guys charting new territory then in terms of Bubs' stage performance, and was that something like, or did you inherit, was there a tradition of doing choreo, or where did that come from?
I brought in to choreograph King Tufts.
Yeah, that's right.
Jim Morelli.
So I actually hired a choreographer.
All right.
That was the first time we ever did anything that was dance related.
We did no,
Fantastic. That's
No, I think in fairness, no, I remember, I seem to remember the notion of groups doing little steps to things like At the Hop, for instance. Sort of 50s appropriate choreography. The first fully choreographed thing, a la Thriller, where the group would spread across the stage and not use its classic W configuration, I think was King Tut. And, God loved that choreography because musically it certainly had nothing. And the choreo totally made that tune.
fantastic. I'm glad I asked that. That's great to know.
We had big choreographed numbers my freshman year. We did Andy's arrangement, or is it Andy and Craig's arrangement of MCAT?
Yeah.
It actually was a tune that I wrote in my first of 2 years in medical school, and then there was not a third and fourth year. That I wrote with a classmate. I actually wrote with a med school classmate for like a little parody show. And I said, I've got this acapella background. I'm sure I can find 4 people out of the 47 in my class who can sing. Well, I could find 2 anyway. And the other guy and I collaborated on the lyrics, and I wrote the music. And then somehow it ended up in the Bub repertoire, this medley of Village People songs.
Right. For those of you who don't know, MCAT is it's a YMCA by the Village People, and then there's a medley with Macho Man, only they called it Macho Man. But that was a big hit. That was like usually our encore, and it was choreographed, and the crowd went wild. I mean, the recordings from that is just like screaming for MCAT and after MCAT. So we did that. And I didn't realize how many years we did it. I wrote Andy earlier. Going through my cassette tapes at these concerts, we were still doing it by my junior year. We just kept doing it.
so there was precedent for big
Yeah, okay, great.
choreographers. For Thriller, there was that great choreography in the video, and I just wanted to reproduce it.
Yeah.
I just studied what he did with the needle on the record, I did with the videotape. Every single move, every single moment, watching it, imitating it, writing it down, and then bringing it back to Tufts so that we can all learn it.
Fantastic. And there's a YouTube video of it, if you Google 83, 84 Bubs during the Thriller. So Deke, you heard those Bubs on tour. Thank you, Marty. You heard those Bubs on tour when you were a sophomore in high school in San Francisco. You went to the same high school as Chris Nomura, who had gone with the group back to his high school. And so there you were, and you heard them, and you were blown away, and you subsequently learned every part on that album, score, 82, 83 Bubs album. And then when you eventually became music director in 88, 89, you presided over the album 14, which was my freshman year. It was the Bubs' first CD, which was really an homage to score in a number of ways. And then you went and effected a radical shift in Bubs' musical style, at least the way I think about it. And it was one that not everyone in the group, let alone the Alumni Association, was on board with right away. Coming back to something Bill or Gene was saying, Deke would bring in arrangements where, which you don't even think twice about anymore, but where the backgrounds are all singing din-din-din-din-din, or did-did-did-did, or something like that. And we still had guys whose primary interest in singing was based on having sung in choruses in high school or something, who were like, you expect me to sing no words? Like, they'd flip through the arrangement and be like, where are the words for my part? So what seems so just commonplace now was not commonplace, not for us in the group right away, and certainly not for the Alumni Association. I remember getting some tough love from some of the gentlemen on the stage, even when we were performing back then. So can you just tell us what was going on in your mind, and how did this happen?
Well, okay. To back up, first of all, the whole purpose is girls, okay? I want to make sure that's perfectly clear, at least it was for me. Now, when I was in high school and did the music band, and then we kept the quartet going during lunchtime, Chris and Mark came back, Bubs performed, Pratty at the helm, Marty in the group. I mean, it was a life-changing experience. The shaft of light, like the blues came through. I was just completely enamored of this. So when he brought back these arrangements, these guys were my Mozart and Beethoven. I learned to arrange from them, and there was very little published music that was out there. So listening to these recordings, transcribing, studying their voice leading, their understanding the voice, and maybe part of my fault in music director and kind of being off on this tangent was that I came into the Bubs with 4 years of Bubs history, and I'm sure during those auditions when I was able to know the names of the guys in the room and sing Bushes and Briars perfectly on 3 different parts, except on the very line I sang a B instead of a C. It still fits in the chord in measure 14 there. I got the second wrong, I'm sorry. Thinking that every single guy in the room read music perfectly, were music like experts, I was like off on this other planet as to what I thought the Bubs were, and a lot of it was filtered through these musical geniuses to my left. So the first album, 14, was really about the past and bringing and celebrating this history. And I asked for arrangements from these earlier guys that I wanted to tag down and for the guys who I wasn't able to get in touch with. I pulled songs from the files that hadn't been recorded. Interesting note, Major Tom was supposed to be on that album, and it was delivered about 4 months late. I'm still bitter about this, Marty. But it was worth the wait. It was totally worth the wait. You don't remember that? I remember bugging all kinds of ones like, hey, will you arrange this song? And we need this kind of a tune, we need this jazz thing and all this kind of stuff. And can we do this song as the Reverend and all that kind of stuff? Anyway, moving from that and then going into the next year, the 1990 year, when I was historian, Danny and I would sit around and look at plaques on the walls and talk about Thriller. And there were people that couldn't even get in the chapel, and some people broke the glass in the back trying to look in. And so this idea of doing a song that was super popular, super current, and really captured the zeitgeist at the time was constantly on our minds. In fact, Tuesdays were when the Billboard charts were released, and the list would be put up in Tower Records. So on my way back from the conservatory at Mass Ave, I would stop and watch the charts and see what was going up, and no, that's kind of tapering off. And Danny would call, like, I just heard the new Kinks song called the UK Jive. It's on the radio, turn it on right now. So, like, listening to it, like, ooh, I don't know if it's going to be a hit. Let's give it 1 week. Because the key wasn't even good enough to sing a song that's popular now. We wanted to capture the songs that were going to be popular. So in 2-3 months, we'd show up at a gig, and it was just getting popular, and all of the women in the audience were like, they're so dreamy. Because like I said at the point, it was girls. So there was a song. And I saw the movie Say Anything, and there's that canonical scene where John Cusack's holding up the beatbox, and Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes is playing, and I saw that moment, I was like, that, if we can capture that, it would be perfect. So I went back to Top Records, Tuesday, the song had already been on the charts and off, because it was on a previous album, and it started to come back on the charts, and I was like, this is going to be huge. Okay, I need to arrange this tune. Go back to my room, listen to it, and it's basically unarrangeable. It just doesn't work. We're talking drums and all these textures and stuff, and the things that work for the voice are not the things that necessarily made cool college rock at the time. That was another thing. There was acapellas on the radio, but it was very much the Boyz II Men, Bobby McFerrin, Don't Worry Be Happy, Nylons, Kissing Goodbye kind of sound, that proto-doo-wop that had moved forward sometimes with the drum machine behind it. The current popular music had distortion. It was very rhythmic and percussive, a lot of low-end driving, whatever. Anyway, basically I was like, I have to find a way. I just have to keep pounding away John Henry like at this arrangement. And so I took out some staff paper that was like orchestral paper and just started to transcribe, what am I hearing? And I came up with, I thought it was 4, but Danny, I believe, corrected me by showing me my own sheet music, as he often does, and said, no, it was 5 parts. 5 parts of vocal lines that were to imitate or create the textures of the percussion. One was talking drum, one was a shaker, one was a hi-hat, one person was doing a combination of kick and drum, something like this. And then the background parts were overlayered oohs and ahs and like you'd open from an ooh through an O to an ah sound, so you'd get that kind of flange sweep sound. And cascading, using, I think that arrangement maybe used 10, 11 parts out of 14 guys or something like that, and knowing like, well that, I won't learn a part, and then whoever gets the solo, then I'll slip onto their part in the background, and then we can jump over here. And it was, I remember bringing it to the group and having the guys go, what is this? Well, luckily they had just 30 minutes worth of faith in me, so that was all it took to hand out these parts and try to make sense of it. But it was when we first performed it for the audience, and they went ballistic. But before they went ballistic,
who was the solo on that?
That was John Gifford, and he killed it. They were the audience. Women just were like this. And that's the whole point. Like I said, the thesis is girls or guys, but seriously. So
even if they noticed that John was looking at the lyrics right now.
But it's the silence before they went nuts. Yeah. There was that pause. You guys all know what I'm talking about. And when we did that, it was off to the races. Because there were a whole class of songs we could never really touch. Before that, Danny and I would talk. We were Lewis and Clark. We were just all constantly thinking about Bubs' history, a lot of work, and okay, what are the top 3 parameters for what will make a great arrangement? All of this kind of stuff, incessantly, to the annoyance, I'm sure, of most people around us. And there were a whole class of songs, like songs by U2, like it just didn't work with voices and in the vocal idiom. But we started to unlock what would happen, and then I think the real key was when the 1991 year rolled around. There was this mass exodus from the group. We graduated 7 guys, 2 other guys went off for a year abroad or did other things, and we just had tons of new people coming to the group. And they didn't really know any different. So it made it really, I was really worried about that year because there was so much new blood. They didn't know any different. Yeah, Bubs was there, and it was just like, here, you're gonna go shoot me to the Walmart Seagull for the next 3 minutes. And it's like, great, okay, sure.
Very concisely, can you just map out for us? So this new musical style percolates up to
the surface here in the Bubs.
Sure.
And it's right around that time that you're starting what becomes the Contemporary Acapella Society of America across the street here in Stratton Hall as a fifth-year senior. And the internet is starting to arrive on college campuses. Can you just map out for us how those forces combine to result in what became a huge explosion in the popularity of acapella?
I'm just going to make a comment before that, because I recall at just about that time, he and I were having a conversation right in front of this building, across the street on the sidewalk. And I said, so, what are you going to be when you grow up? What are you going to do? He said, I really think this acapella thing could go somewhere. And I just looked at it. I said, I don't know. And you really made it work. I give you a lot of credit. You really made it work.
Thank you.
So my question, the reason I put that question to Deep is because if I have my numbers correct, I think at the late 80s, early 90s, when this was happening, you probably had about 250 college acapella groups across the country.
Yeah.
It was mostly an Ivy League thing, it was mostly a Northeast thing, a little pocket in California. 10 years later, that number is like 1,500 or something. And they're almost all doing this style of music, this new style of music that was, born here, more or less. So can you just tell it, you have...
Yeah, it was really just the desire to perpetuate Beelzebubdom through the rest of my life. I didn't want to graduate, I didn't want to stop doing this kind of thing, so how can I keep doing it? Well, there's no community, there's no industry, there's no nothing, there's no network. Groups didn't know that there was a huge void. So, wow, I'm going to have to create a community and start a nonprofit and put out a newsletter, because it was all mail newsletter. The internet really came in much later than that. People weren't really on...
Well, by 93, you had like these news groups anyway. I mean, it was so... If you remember, in the very early 90s, late 80s, you had no way of knowing what the Stanford Mendicants were doing unless they happened to come here on tour, or you randomly happened to come up on their cassette or an album or something. But then you started having news groups where somebody would write something, a listserv or something about some song they had heard them do, and at least you had started to have some sense of what was going on.
Absolutely, and in our paper newsletter, which was originally the Collegiate Acapella News, the CAN, which became the Contemporary Acapella News, when a couple of pro groups and fans asked, like, can you kind of widen the scope? So, and then that CA became CASA, Contemporary Acapella Society of America.
All these guys see their role as just merely having been facilitators.
That comes into conflict when you have such a diverse spectrum of choices. And those choices range from anything from how do we feel about bringbacks, how do we feel about reaching back in the files, which has been very popular at different times. On one hand, it's a plethora of experience, and you already have these resources at your hand at your disposal. On the other hand, you might feel, oh, we're not, we're leaning on that, we're not creating something new. And so that becomes the conflict. And then you have same issues of sort of instrumental versus, I think in some ways, choral textures can be repopularized in the current landscape. And so those choices become, come into conflict, as well as repertoire choices. Do we try the sort of approach of let's get on things right before they're going out, so that we're not late to the game, and then by the time you record it, it's completely irrelevant. Versus sort of what Ed's bringing up, which is almost a niche market of going into a set. And I guess, I don't know if we didn't bring this up, but I think it was during your time that you were starting to see sets and play songs and sets as specific sort of components.
I think I wrote a dissertation on the BubNet in 1993.
Part of the thing what I was saying was the machine when you got in, is that you got in, and if you were going to be a music director, you were like handed like this Danny Lichtenfeld like music director note that had all these things like
It's falling apart.
written out.
Good, that's for the better.
So anyways, there becomes, I guess, just and for people who, I guess it's more apparent if you've been here recently, but there's been talks of something like a 6-song set or a 8-song set, where each each role, each slot in the set fills a specific role. And that could be anything from when you want your high energy songs, when you want something with great mood, something funny, when you want a nice ballad, when you want to just wrench into people's hearts, and when you want to get the girls on their and that becomes, I think, something of a jack of all trades. And I think Bubs have made fine work over the whole history of being really strong in a lot of areas, and it also causes sort of an identity crisis. And so I think I'm interested in also talking about the future, because that's sort of goes to my right, the future, but what that means.
That's what this chair is for.
And what it means to sort of have accumulated all this, and to both hold on to it and to accept the notion that's always been sort of innately Bubs of pushing forward.
Danny, can I make a comment about that? I think first of all, Michael showed us last night and has over the recent years that he has some serious arranging chops. The last tune done last night, Simon and Garfunkel tune, it's a great piece of work. But the point I want to make is that he has shown a kind of a circumspection that I think is a little bit the responsibility of the music director to understand that you're not only going to perform on college campuses, that you have this body of your this component of your audience, namely the Beelzebub Alumni Association, and they might want to hear some different stuff from time to time. They love the new stuff, but you know what? Let's kind of connect back to our history. I was very impressed with the tune, with the choice of the tune, and I am very grateful to all the music directors who have kind of been mindful of the fact that we have a long lineage of musical tastes and kind of pay homage to that.
Thank you. So I want to ask one last question before I open it up to all of you, and anybody can jump in and answer this. And I'm asking this question particularly mindful of the fact that Scott Rayo's in the room, and Craig Meyer, and Mark Klein was here a second ago too, and that is, what happened to intros? And Bill Allen, yeah, that's right, that's the other person I was thinking. What happened to intros and I mean, I don't just mean like intros, I'm just being a pain in the ass about intros. You have to have intros in your set. For us, it was, a thoughtful and integral part of our overall performance when we were in the group, and it gave certain guys in the group a whole way of interacting with the audience that they might not get just by singing. And I felt like it gave the audience a more individualized sense of who the members of the group were. But it must have had its downsides too, or its time must have come or something. But I'm curious, what happened with intros? And I also don't really know what the landscape was like with intros before my time in the group. So was it just this oddity for a little while I was in the group, that it would go song, skit, song, skit, song, skit?
With, like, obviously when Killer and Jimmy were in the group, they had actually prepared pieces.
Yeah.
They would tell how to do. In fact, there was one concert that we were performing over in Cohen, and a fellow from the audience started heckling us. We'd never had that experience before, and Jim stepped right out and started this thing with him, and it turned into actually a 5-minute routine with Jim and his father. It was the first time. So there were things like that happened.
Scott Ray had done that to us.
There were things like that happened on a somewhat regular basis, but we never really took it much beyond some gags. And we really did no choreo. There wasn't that whole Beelzebub Institute thing going on that came later that I thought was absolutely fabulous, but it has seemed to drift away.
I was there when he died. So like I said, I got to school and there was this machine of like everything you were supposed to do, and it's simultaneously great and also simultaneously like really resent it because like it's chores, you know what I mean? Of course. So what had happened, I think had evolved from like, you know, maybe guys talking to the song, being casual, into just like skits. And it was like, we have to put together the show, and also on the night before the show, you have to get together and like write 2 funny skits. And they were almost always not funny, and you almost always hated having to be there to write them. And at one point it was like, why don't we just not do them? And it was like all in favor, and it was like basically unanimous. And also the time like Cheap Socks was on campus and like killing it. So there was this, it would be like a Cheap Socks got up between 2 songs and did like really, really terrible acapella. It just made no sense whatsoever. So we just kind of, we tried to kill it, and the idea was to ultimately go back to where it was just more casual. Like, I'm just a person on stage between 2 songs and I'm talking a little bit rather than like the curtain opens and drama ensues.
Marty? I can just fill in what happened in the middle. By the time I was in the group, and definitely when I was music director, you would just write out your songs and you would put a different person's name between each song, and it would be their responsibility to decide what to say, and a lot of our guys just came up with funny stuff. So Will had his character that he came out with. Bob was a very good intro giver. Tom Regan was another one that was a very good intro giver. We always depended on Bill's Rindersella. You know, that was practically a song in the set.
Mike and E's going to be this afternoon.
What's that?
Mike and E's going to be this afternoon.
Oh, Jim! Let me just say for 10 seconds, for those of you who don't know what you're speaking about, for our years, skits were in between each song, and they were very clearly, we would get together, we would write them, we'd spend a long time.
We had intro rehearsals.
We'd have intro rehearsals that were like skit writing sessions and test things out on campus, and then when we tour, we would use the best skits from the past few years, so it was really a great hits. So yes, they were dumb, but they were very carefully thought. And also, I think what that did is it freed us up during our music to be more serious, to be more powerful, and everything else Danny said.
As an audience member at the time, the skits would get just as much talk after the show as the songs would. So what did they do for BRT? Oh, it was hilarious.
Wow. That's a
Yeah, the Bubs repertoire, the whole stretch of the Bubs repertoire thing was really,
That was a good run there.
it was pretty amazing, actually.
And-
I always looked forward to it.
Yeah.
I always looked forward to it. So the answer is Adam Kilmer.
I also had a strict no choreography policy. I grew up in Ohio, there was no acapella, we had show choir, so we had to sing and dance, and I hated the dancing part. My lifestyle was as little movement as
So, Mike, were you going to say something about this?
Well, I was going to say for people who are in the group with Danny that haven't necessarily seen the group is that that legacy has carried on in the sense that some of the best or worst, depending on your point of view, of that era is sort of wheelhouse at times that the current group has drawn on in my time. So for us, I think it's sort of site specific, and it's a little tough, when we go to, sing for Phillips Healthcare, you might not do How Not to Walk. But we did that, show once. My first gig as a new guy, when I'd been there for 3 days, I wasn't singing, but the group had to fill an hour-long set in the beginning of September. And so we pulled back, and they did newbies.
Adam Gardner's new guy intro.
And so and that was, scarring for me as a new guy. But also, I think it's sort of been a healthy, or not so healthy. There's been a balance of how bad but lovable do we want to be, how professional, how just regular guys. So that's sort of
Absolutely.
balance.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I just trying to, one less sarcastic reason why I think it evolved the way it did was because the skits had gotten so theater and elaborate, it got to the point where it was no longer personally breaking the ice. There was still the fourth wall, and these guys doing a skit, and I would have people, give you all the unsolicited feedback you as a music director when you do gigs, churches or whatever, is people come up and it's like, I would have loved to just hear somebody come out and say hi and talk and let us know who you are as people rather than just being these performing robots.
Yeah.
So I think that was one reason, but it was the same sort of shooting community where the skits just got so ridiculous that they kind of stopped serving the original purpose.
So there's probably, when it's probably worked best is when there's been a balance between those elements and perhaps that, that's still a paradigm that could work going forward. Questions? Reed.
Comment, footnote first. In those dark years that Andy was talking about, one of the things people also think about is that the music landscape was dark. But I think it's worth mentioning that Andy had a really eclectic taste, but elevated eclectic taste in what he listened to and what he gave to us. So that maybe disco was king, but we never saw disco except maybe in Tut. We were seeing, and it wasn't just in that transfer. I mean, that take you back from Rocky, and there was Kenny Rankin, there was Michael Franks.
Al Jarreau.
Yeah, things that not everybody who was sitting in the Tufts campus was listening to for sure.
Yeah.
And that I think really helped give us some durability beyond the fad. And it brought some gems out that people otherwise wouldn't even appreciate as having been in the musical department at the time. So I wanted to just mention that and to thank you for elevating our musical taste.
I want to, and I know you have a question too, I want to thank you for making that point and say that I think that probably applies to all of these guys up here. Brent, you had a question?
My question to maybe all the musical directors is whether you sense that there was either a change from your predecessors or something unique about your groups in terms of their maybe their major. You had lots of engineers, and that meant that they were structural and they could read music better. Or you had lots of nerds, and so they knew how to concentrate and focus, and so they would actually do their music homework. Or a lot of party guys, so that meant that they were free and easy. Were there demographics that you could talk about that either changed with time or were important to your success?
Well, I mean, you obviously have to arrange for the guys you have, and in our case, we were stocked with some very strong solo voices, so we would, the arranging style started to drift from 4-part to, 5 and just lay out a solo with some background there, and then you'd still see in some of those arrangements, halfway through we break back into the 4-part thing and do that, and the soloist would get back out. But I do think that that's one of the difficulties for a current group to reach back into the library, because a lot of that music is designed for people who are in those groups. It's great music, but if you don't have those personnel, what?
Sure. Yeah. Good point. Evan.
So first, thanks, Danny, for running the panel. But one of the disappointments of you running the panel is that you're not sitting there. And so I have a question for you, which was, you really codified what officer positions were supposed to do in the Bubs, not just in music, to the point where, I read Danny Lichtenfeld's business manager manual. Can you talk a little bit about that process and also about the set design where we have the number of songs and sets? I think that really came from your era and is important still today.
Well, I'm just super anal that way because I feel like once I achieve a moment of clarity about something or a level of understanding about something, I better write it down because I'm going to forget it if I don't. And also, I feel strongly that here's what I think is the very best thing about the Bubs, and what has at the bottom of it all has resulted in the Bubs having this extraordinary legacy of accomplishment. It's that we have access to all the we have quick and easy access to all the knowledge that and experience that has come before us because the group is so tight, and we have this extraordinary turnout, and everybody gets together. I can just pick up the phone and call any one of these guys on any given day. So we have access to all that information, but it's an organization that, unlike, say, the Georgetown Chimes or lots of other organizations that exist out in the world, does not say, this is the way we've done it, and you must learn it and do it that way. It says, this is the way we've done it. You're a fool if you don't take the time to learn it, because probably a lot of what we've already sorted out is going to be useful for you going forward. But if you want to do it differently and can come up with a better way of doing it, then great. So I always felt like it was a responsibility, once we figured out certain things that were working, about how to organize your year as business manager, or about what types of songs you put in what order in order to achieve a successful set.
I'm gonna write that down so they will stop calling me. And then it's there, and they can look at it on their own time. So that was sort of what compelled me to write it down. As far as the specifics about the set, seriously, I think it's like dissertation length. What were my ideas, and which I have no idea if they're even relevant anymore in the landscape of, what the group needs to achieve and the kinds of performances it does today. But we had very clear ideas, and I didn't come up with them. I mean, it was, it was a lot of cribbing from Deke and learning from Deke and trying things and figuring things out over the period of years, 5 years that I was in the group, and then a few years after where I stayed very closely involved. But it was very clear what kind of song you needed third in a 7-song set, or fourth, or sixth. I mean, it was just like, and so you'd be eyeing your next home show coming up a few weeks down the road, and saying, we need a number 3. And you'd go to Tower Records specifically looking for a number 3. So, whatever that meant. Gordon.
This is a follow-up on a point raised by Deke, which is that it's all about girls. And my question is, did it always work? I mean, did it ever work?
You can't ask Deke that question.
Again, it's not the right time, yes.
Did it always
No,
work?
the status of singing a cappella at a college campus changed over the time scale.
Well, I don't think it did.
We're going to bring the music, we're going to bring the kids in here. Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's my sense, watching the groups that came after me, and, having been in one where it was just incredibly cool. You really wanted to do it. There was a status associated with it. I think if anything, this organization, like any where you're putting your egos out literally on stage, it's about how to maintain some modicum of humility. And it's hard. It's admittedly very, very hard to do because you just enter the cat's ass all the time. I think we probably, there was a lot of that woven, a lot of the sort of the humility message woven into the fabric of the organization because we're trying very hard not to let this stuff kind of go to our heads and to be normal guys. It's one of the things I love, by the way, about these panels. The panel 2 days ago was really just mind-blowing for me. I didn't learn anything that I didn't know, but hearing those guys up here just being guys behind the scenes at the sing-off and at Pitch Perfect, was fabulous for me. I'm just reminded that we are all workaday guys and different kinds of jobs and have our interests and our peccadillos and all of that stuff, But getting back to an original point, yeah, I think it has always been a tremendous honor, and we've known it, and we kind of play it sometimes.
I guess I just want to supplement that by saying we're probably kidding ourselves if we don't acknowledge the fact that there's surely a world of women out there who did not come anywhere close to us or want to touch us with a 10-foot pole because we were singing.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
I'm sure that's
But they were not.
But here's a related anecdote, and then John has a question. I spoke to Scott Buckner a few months ago, talking to him about the reunion. He unfortunately can't be there this weekend because his kid is graduating from college. And actually, when I first called, I got his wife, Marnie, I think is her name.
Marcy.
Yeah, Marnie or Marcy. And she said, well, I wonder if you know this story. When I was at Tufts as a freshman, I saw the Bubs perform in the chapel, and I decided I was going to marry one of them, and it didn't matter which one. Okay, well, hang on, Craig. John has been waiting patiently. So John Zappetto quickly, and then Craig, and then we have to wrap it up because the kids are coming in from the other panel to perform.
They're ready to come and put on a show for you.
Okay, terrific. Go ahead, John.
My question is, throughout all of this, how did we get to where we were? What is unique about Tufts that this
is also, we're just a bunch of guys. It's the diversity of people and the paths they've taken, where they've come from, the people who have arranged, the people like me who are in the group. I was lucky, I was in the group for 1 year. 1 year. But I'll tell you, it was a very great experience. I brought something, everyone in this group has brought something different. So you're not lockstep in tradition. That, well, this is the way we sung it 15 years ago, and by God, you gotta sing it that way again. The sense I have is there's tradition, you hold on, but the history of this group has learned when to let go. And I think that's the key, in my mind, over the years, that I've seen of the different groups, the different tastes, the new music. I remember when the alums were grumbling and said, who are we to tell them what to sing?
I'm really good at answering this one. I work with lots and lots of groups from all sorts of schools, types of schools, Ivy League schools, state schools, everything in the middle, small liberal arts. There's something about the Tufts person, and this is why all these groups have thrived here, where you're smart enough and talented enough to do really neat things, but not put together enough to channel that into something important. The kids who have it together are down the red line.
Craig.
I was going to say, it's neat being in a family where we have 3 kids who just adore the Bubs. We've watched all the stuff, and it's so cool that it actually reaches a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And the girls are all disappointed that they can't be Bubs. I remember one of the reunions when Anna was 5. You know, or at the thing that you did, she looked at me and said, and asked Danny, she said, can I come to the 100th anniversary? If my dad is alive. She wants to have that experience. So I think what they're responding to is the brotherhood and the continuity.
Well, maybe that's the next big thing in the Bubs.